Hello, boys and girls. It's Pastor Shawn. I know that many of you are at home today and for a while from school, and so I thought that I would share with you some of my favorite stories and books that me and my children like to read together. Today, I want to read to you one that Franklin and I love, and it is by Dr. R.C. Sproul. Parents, this is someone you probably want to know and learn more about. He's a pastor and was a pastor, and many great resources are free right now by him online, and so you can check him out. But he wrote a series of books, and this book is one of those, and I look forward to sharing this with you today. It's called The Prince's Poison Cup. One morning, not so long ago, in a snug house in a small town, a little girl was feeling sick. Her name was Ella Ruth, but her family simply called her Ella. Ella had a bad tummy ache, so the doctor had given her some medicine. Ella's father poured some of the medicine into a spoon, but as soon as Ella saw the medicine, she frowned and said, "Oh, Daddy, this medicine looks yucky. Do I really have to take it?" Her father smiled and said, "Yes, dear, you have to take the medicine if you want to get well." So Ella worked up her courage and finished the medicine just as her father told her. But then she asked, "Daddy, why does medicine taste so bad if it's going to make us well?" "Well," her father said, "that's a question you should ask Grandpa. He's always can answer your hard question. He's coming to visit this afternoon. Get some rest so you'll be feeling better when he gets here." Ella took a nap and woke up when Grandpa arrived. He hugged Ella and asked her how she was feeling, and Ella told him she was feeling better. But when she looked up at him and said, "Grandpa, may I ask you a question?" Grandpa nodded and replied, "Of course, my dear." "Grandpa, why is my medicine so yucky if it's going to make me so well?" Grandpa looked thoughtful. "That's a very good question, Ella," he said. "Some things that look or taste or smell wonderful are really awful. But sometimes things that seem terrible are actually very good. I even remember a story in which both of these strange things were true. Would you like to hear it?" "Oh, yes," Ella said. She loved the stories Grandpa told to explain things. So Grandpa sat down, and Ella snuggled up close beside him. Grandpa began by saying, "Once upon a time, there was a great king. He was called the King of Life because he had the power to make anything, even living things like plants, animals, and people. The king made a beautiful park filled with trees, streams, lakes, and meadows. Each day, the king came to the park and visited with his subjects, the people that he had made. They were very happy as they walked together in the beauty of the park. In the center of the park, the king placed a fountain. Up from the fountain bubbled beautiful water that looked cool and sweet. But the king told his people, 'You may drink from all the streams of the park, but you may not drink from the fountain. The water in the fountain will harm you. Do not drink it.' At first, the king's subjects enjoyed spending time with him so much that they didn't even go close to the fountain. They loved the king and wanted to please him. But then they began to get curious. They wondered why he didn't want them to drink the water of the fountain, which looked so pure and refreshing. One day, a stranger in a long black cloak appeared in the park. The people didn't know it, but the stranger was the king's arch enemy. He told the people that the water in the fountain wasn't bad at all. He said that if they would try it, the water would do wonderful things for them. It would make them as great as the king himself. By now, the people were very curious about the water. It didn't seem fair that the king wouldn't let them drink from the fountain, so they decided to try it. The stranger filled a cup with water from the fountain and gave it to the people, and they drank it. But a terrible thing happened when the people drank the water. Their hearts turned to stone. After that, they no longer felt any love for their king. They didn't even want to be with him anymore. They stopped coming to the park to spend time with him. Instead, they moved to a desert far away from the park and built themselves a city. They called it the City of Man. The King of Life was angry that the people had disobeyed him. He knew that because of the people's terrible violation of his command, he would be justified in destroying their city. But the king still loved his people and felt sorry for them in their pain. The king was very wise and had known that the people would drink from the fountain, and he already had a plan to help them. He went to his son, who was the prince of the kingdom, and said to him, "I want you to help heal our subjects." At that point in the story, Ella stopped Grandpa and asked, "What did the king want the prince to do?" "It was an awful task," Grandpa said. "The king gave the prince a golden cup and told him to go to the City of Man. There in the central plaza of the city, the prince would find another fountain. But this fountain was not filled with sweet-looking water. It was filled with terrible poison. The poison was made up of the king's anger over the people's disobedience. One drop of the poison would kill a strong man. But the king told the prince to use the golden cup to drink a whole cupful of the poison in the fountain. He said if the prince would do that, his subjects would be healed and could come back to the park." The prince loved his father and his people, and even though the mission sounded very hard, he was determined to fulfill it. So he started on a journey to the City of Man. Several of his friends went with him. On the way to the city, the prince and his friends stopped by a pond. The prince stared into the water, which was beautiful, calm, and blue. But as he continued to gaze in the water, something strange happened. In his mind, he saw a large cup filled with dark, murky liquid. He knew that it was the cup of poison that his father had commanded him to drink. The prince closed his eyes and shook his head to get the picture of the awful cup out of his mind. For a moment, he thought about turning back, but he remembered the king's order. He had to go to the City of Man. He knew that was where the poison was. When the prince and his friends arrived in the city, they saw that it was a terrible place. The streets were dark and filled with mud and trash. Many of the homes were broken down, and the people were unfriendly and suspicious. Someone recognized the prince of the son of the King of Life. Because they no longer loved the king, the people began to treat the prince quite badly. They shouted curses at him, spat at him, and taunted him. Some even tossed rocks at him or slapped him as he passed by. The prince trembled in fear and began to sweat. He loved his father, but he couldn't help wondering if there was another way for the people to be healed. He wondered if he really had to drink the poison. He thought about the golden cup he was carrying and said to himself, "I wish that I didn't have to drink from this cup." As the prince struggled with his fear, he remembered the words of his father, "You must drink the cup. It's the only way to heal our people." More than anything else, the prince wanted to please the king. So right then and there, he decided that he would not turn back, but would drink the poison just as his father had asked, no matter what pain and suffering it might cost him. The prince's friends also became very frightened as the angry mob of people around them grew, and one by one they all ran away. Soon, the prince was all alone in the midst of the angry people, but he kept looking for the fountain that was full of poison. Finally, the prince entered a great plaza. In the center of the plaza was the fountain, and standing by the fountain was a man in a dark cloak. It was the king's archenemy, the one who had persuaded the people to drink from the fountain in the park. The prince approached the fountain. Without saying a word, he took out the golden cup his father had given him and held it out to the man. With a cruel smile, the man filled the prince's cup with water from the fountain and gave it to the prince. The angry people of the city gathered around the fountain to see what would happen. The prince looked at the poison that filled his cup. It was dark, murky, and smelly. He was horrified and disgusted by it. He knew it would kill him, but as he looked around at the faces of the angry people, he remembered that their stony hearts would be healed if he drank it. He put his lips to the edge of the cup and began to drink. The poison tasted bitter. He wanted to spit it out, but he had promised his father he would drink it all. The poison burned down his throat, but he continued to swallow. He finished it all right down to the last sip. When the poison was all gone, the prince bowed his head, closed his eyes, and died. He fell to the pavement beside the fountain, and as he fell, the man in the dark cloak laughed with glee, for he thought he had killed the king's son, and all the people gave a great shout of triumph. Just then, someone else entered the plaza. This person wore a cloak that was brilliant white, so bright no one could look at it. And as he walked, the ground trembled. He approached the fountain, and as he came, the man in the dark cloak stopped laughing. In dismay, he tried to shield his eyes from the brightness of the newcomer's cloak, but it was impossible. He began to run away, and as he ran, he screamed, "The King of Life has come! Run for your lives!" All the people fled, hiding themselves in the alleys and doorways around the plaza. The king stopped beside the body of the prince. Kneeling down, he touched his son. When he did, the prince opened his eyes. He was alive again. The King of Life had brought the prince back from death. At that moment, the liquid bubbling out of the fountain changed. No longer was it dark, murky poison. Now it was beautiful, clear, sweet water. The poison quickly drained away, and the water filled the fountain. The water glittered in the sunlight and tinkled merrily as it fell into the fountain, and its sweet, fresh smell drifted across the plaza. The water seemed to be alive. The prince stood up and found the golden cup. Going to the fountain, he held it under the falling water and filled it to the brim. Then he turned to the people and held the cup out to them. "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink," he called out. And the blowing wind seemed to be carrying his words throughout the plaza and among the people watching from the shadows. At that point, an amazing thing began to happen. The hearts of the people began to change. Growing soft and warm once again, some of the people's hearts remained cold and hard. But all around the plaza, the hearts of men and women, boys and girls, old and young people, rich merchants and poor workers were transformed. Slowly, fearfully, those whose hearts were changed began to approach the fountain. They had always been repulsed by the horrible poison, but the prince and the water he offered looked so glorious, they could not hold back. Finally, one little boy approached the prince and timidly took the cup. Then he took a small sip and swallowed the water. The people watched anxiously, but nothing terrible happened. Instead, the boy simply looked up at the king and the prince with love and gratitude. He had been taught to hate them, but now that hate was gone. Seeing that nothing happened bad to the boy after he drank from the cup, many other people quickly followed his example. They no longer wanted to run and hide from the king. Instead, they came to drink from the golden cup, and all those who drank praised the king and the prince for healing them. They saw that the terrible poison the prince had drunk was wonderful medicine for them. And although it tasted awful to the prince and caused him to die, it had healed their stony hearts. After that, the people joyfully began to visit the park once more, and they took great delight in walking with the King of Life and the prince who had restored them to life again. Grandpa leaned over to Ella and said to her, Ella, I want you to remember that we get sick because of our sinfulness. That's why the medicine that makes our bodies well usually looks and tastes bad. But the prince had to drink something far more terrible so that his people might be healed from the results of their disobedience. Each time you have to take bitter medicine, I want you to remember the story of the prince's poison cup. I will, Grandpa, Ella promised. And do you know what? I know another prince who died for his people. Do you? Grandpa asked with a twinkle in his eye. What a great story this is. Boy, it was scary when the prince took the poison and died. But wasn't it great when the king brought him back to life? Boys and girls, this is a story that reminds us of the wonderful gift that is given to us in Jesus Christ. He took the bitter wrath or the bitter poison of dying on the cross for us. And 3 days later, he came to life. And when we trust in him, we can walk in our lives with him forever. If you want to know more about Jesus' story, you can talk to your mom and dad. I know they would love to talk to you more about that. Thank you for listening and sharing this story with me. We hope that you have a great week